slow version.
Hello.
These are the laws.
These are the laws.
These are the laws.
These are the laws.
These are the laws. These are the laws that set the rules, that ban the kids from boxers' rules. These are the laws that washed our minds, that told us all that love is a crime. These are the laws.
These are the laws.
These are the laws. These are the laws.
These are the laws.
These are the laws. These are the laws made by the lords who called us sick and predators, who stole our pride and families, who blamed us all for spreading disease. 1 and 1 is 2. 2 and 2 is the law. They're trying to make us all go back to the way it was before. These are the laws.
These are the laws.
These are the laws. These are the laws.
These are the laws.
These are the laws. These are the laws that set the rules, that banned the books from our kids' schools, that locked us up and washed our minds, that told us all that love is a crime. These are the laws.
These are the laws.
These are the laws. These are the laws.
These are the laws.
These are the laws. These are the laws made by the lords that called us sick and predators, who stole our pride, our families, and blamed us all for spreading disease. 1 and 1 is 2. 2 and 2 is the law. They're trying to make us all go back to the way it was before. These are the laws.
These are the laws.
These are the laws. These are the laws.
These are the laws.
These are the laws. These are the laws that set the rules, that banned the books from our kids' schools, that locked us up and washed our minds, that told us all that love is a crime. These are the laws.
These are the laws.
These are the laws. These are the laws.
These are the laws.
These are the laws. These are the laws made by the lords that called us sick and predators, who stole our pride, our families, and blamed us all for spreading disease. 1 and 1 is 2. 2 and 2 is the law. They're trying to make us all go back to the way it was before. These are the laws.
These are the laws.
These are the laws. These are the laws.
These are the laws.
These are the laws.
Turn the clock back and Britain was a very different place. Britain was a very different place. Britain was a very different place. In the 50s, with more than 1,000 British men in prison for homosexuality, the Wolfenden Report recommended decriminalisation.
Homosexual behaviour between adult consenting males in private should no longer be a criminal offence.
It was a real breathe out moment. It was a
What he says homosexuals want is not just tolerance, but acceptance by the community. Acceptance by the community. Acceptance by the community. What he says homosexuals want is not just tolerance, but acceptance by the community. Acceptance by the community. Acceptance
Well,
by the
I
community.
don't think they are born that way.
So are the security services right? Are gay civil servants security risks, and therefore potential spies?
And the procession here, it stretches back to the left down Temple Place.
Our major concern that small children have actually had homosexuality thrust at them.
Children who need to be taught to respect traditional moral values are being taught that they have an inalienable right to be gay.
And then they legislated against us, so we thought, well, we'll just shake them up a bit.
Incredible. Inside the House of Lords.
The right-wing press were vicious.
I've been attacked in the street over 300 times.
we just had to keep on fighting.
I've been arrested probably 200 times.
I mean, the fight absolutely has to go on.
Welcome, friends, to a very special feature of the lectures on gender and sexuality. My name is Surabhi Shukla, and I'm a lecturer in the School of Law. And for about a year, I have been organizing these lectures on gender and sexuality to inform public opinion through research-led findings. Since then, you have loved it and made these lectures your own and come from every department or not from the university at all to attend them and enrich them through your participation. And for that, a big thank you. But coming to today, we have a very special afternoon planned for you. Today, we will be taking a journey through queer parenting laws in the UK, but we will stand up to the law and critique the law through song and music and poetry. Our speaker today, Katie Jukes, is a senior lecturer at Manchester Metropolitan University and has a special interest in socio-legal issues including gender, sexuality, human rights, LGBTQI+ issues, legal ethics, and the impact of creativity in teaching. Katie is also a poet and writes gorgeous poems and loves to giggle at my supposedly primitive sensibilities that associate poetry with rhyme. To Katie, I have a question. Katie, if poems don't rhyme, aren't they prose? But Katie is not alone in this endeavor. Katie is accompanied by the University of Sheffield's very own S.J. Cooper-Knock. S.J. is a senior lecturer at the School of Law and the Department of Sociological Studies and researches on the politics of urban life in South Africa, especially everyday policing, being and belonging in the city, concepts of urban justice, and the politics of crisis. Today, S.J. will accompany Katie in the lecture by performing some songs and poems, including some never-heard-before originals that they have composed specifically for this lecture. S.J., in your words, I'm chuffed. Now, that's not all. We have with us also 3 lovely singers for your pleasure, Catherine Long, sorry, just 2, because I can't sing, and Scoobs, who have very kindly agreed to give their time and to bring you their melodic renditions of our creations. So that is fantastic news. We are very excited to have you all here and agreeing to do this lecture in a unique way, and haven't we had fun in the rehearsals? But there are some others here who are not here with us today, but whose work has bolstered the lecture by providing additional voices and sentiments to the lecture. They are the poets whose poems we have included in this lecture and which we have the privilege of reading out with their permission. These are the poems that we will read out. Gay Marriage Poem by Jenny Johnson, Bone of My Bone and Flesh of My Flesh by Ellen Bass, from the book The Human Line, published by Copper Canyon, with permission of the author and the publisher. Mythbusters Version 3 by Jay Farley, from the book Queer Icons, published by Broken Sleep Books. And I Invite My Parents to a Dinner Party by Chen Chen. To these poets, a massive thank you. Your generosity in allowing us to read these poems in the spirit of queer kinship makes us feel supported and close to you, and hopefully brings you closer to us as well. Now, before I hand over to Katie and the gang, I would be remiss not to thank the School of Law, the Law Operations, Marketing and Finance team, the Faculty of Social Sciences, Communications team, the Central Room Booking, thanks Win, for allowing us the use of this beautiful room, the Music School for allowing us the use of the piano, the audio-visual team who's providing us with tech support and recording this event today, and of course, my wonderful research assistant, Gabriella Jordan, who keeps us all on the straight and narrow. Thank you very much, all of you, because without all of your support, this event would not have happened. And now, please put your hands together for Katie and the gang, and please enjoy yourselves.
Thank you, Surabhi, for that lovely introduction. So, and welcome everybody. It's fantastic to see so many people here. and I hope you enjoy this talk. So this talk is a critical and creative exploration of queer families in the law. By law, I mean the laws of England and Wales, but what do I mean by queer families? Well, I'm going to begin with some reflections and responses to same-sex marriage, and then going to move on to assisted reproductive technology and surrogacy, and then finish with adoption. So I hope that's enough for you when thinking about queer families. So beginning with same-sex marriage. In 2007, two sisters took the United Kingdom to court in the European Court of Human Rights, in a case some of you may know, over its alleged failure to recognise them as having a relationship that deserved the same protection as gay civil partners or straight husbands and wives. Sybil and Joy were elderly and unmarried and had lived together all of their lives for the last 30 years in a house on land inherited from their parents in Wiltshire. Although the case was about money, and specifically about inheritance tax, it tells us something about the way the state treats those who choose to live a different kind of life. As one of the sisters, Sybil Burden, said, "We are looked down upon for being single. We just want to be treated the same as lesbians and homosexuals," said Sybil. "If we pay the same taxes, then why should we have the same rights?" said Joy. When the UK government announced in 2012 that it intended to make civil marriage lawful for same-sex couples in England and Wales, opinion was divided on the merits of such a reform. On the one hand, some people thought that it was trying to domesticate queers and shore up marriage. A huge step forward in the state intervention to normalise same-sex relationships, or queerness being co-opted into a system that is still deeply hostile to queer lives. Some queer thinkers also describe it as queerness being co-opted into a system where marriage is neoliberalism's handiest little tool. They argue that same-sex marriage marginalises and erases those who do not conform or who are not economically able to conform to what is on offer. On the other hand, there are those who believe that marriage benefits individuals who would not otherwise benefit, that it functions as a pragmatic acceptance, removes the stigma, acts, if you like, as a wedge, or an easy way to get the gay foot into the door of the law. Recent research also suggests that same-sex marriage can improve queer mental health. And I'd now like to hand over to Surabhi Shukla to read the Gay Marriage poem by Jenny Johnson.
Gay Marriage Poem by Jenny Johnson. We could promise to elope like my grandmother did if a football team won on homecoming night. We could be good queers, an oxymoron we never longed for. We could become wedlocked as the suffix was once intended. Lyco, common Teutonic for play, not lock, Old English for cave and enclosure. Instead of a suit, I could wear my t-shirt that avows, support your right to arm bears. Or we could wed in bear suits, just as I saw people do one summer in San Francisco, standing amid a grassy median during rush hour. They were so personally, anonymously political, blocking the ocean breeze in acrylic fur. Forget such solemnities. I want to run through the streets, shouting up to all my beloved's windows, "Friends, in sickness and in health, I refuse to forsake you." On Charlotte Street, Home, Euclid, Decatur, Union, Straub's, Rebecca, Bennett Ave, 38th Woodslayer Way. In the only wedding I was a part of, I was the flower girl who held up the ceremony, kneeling to drop equal dividends of petals beside every pew, refusing to leave anyone out. Let us speak without occasion of relations of our choosing, tied intricately as the warps and wefts amid mats of moss, without competing for sunlight. Our hairy caps are forever lodging in spaces that myopic travelers can't see. Of such loves unwrit, at the boundary layer, between earth and air, I feel most clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Surabhi. On the website of St Michael and All Angels Church in the beautiful and bucolic district of Wentnor, Shropshire, we find the following words.
Lord,
These are the Lord's.
these are the Lord's. These are the Lord's.
These are the Lord's.
These are the Lord's. These are the Lord's.
These are the Lord's.
These are the Lord's.
Getting married is one of the biggest steps you'll take in life. There are several reasons why a religious ceremony can add an extra layer of meaning to your wedding day. A church wedding will add a spiritual dimension to your marriage. God's blessing is the main attraction for many couples, whatever their beliefs. You don't have to be baptized or a regular churchgoer to qualify for a church ceremony. The situation may be more complex if one of you has been married before, or if one of you is a foreign national, but there may still be a way forward. Simply get in touch and we'll be able to advise you. In 2022, the late Desmond Tutu's daughter was barred by the Church of England from leading a funeral in this church because she is married to a woman. Mpho Tutu Van Firth is an Anglican priest in the Diocese of Washington, D.C., and had been asked to officiate at the funeral of her late godfather, Martin Kenyon. Miss Tutu Van Firth told BBC News it seemed really churlish and hurtful. The Diocese of Hereford said it was a difficult situation. After Mr. Kenyon's family was told of the church's decision, they moved the funeral service from St. Michael and All Angels to a marquee in the vicarage next door so Ms. Tutu Van Firth could officiate and preach. The Marriage Same-Sex Couples Act 2013 allows same-sex couples in England and Wales to have the same opportunities as different-sex couples to marry by way of a civil ceremony. However, only a small number of religious organisations and a tiny number of places of worship permit same-sex marriage. Same-sex couples are completely excluded from the almost 16,000 churches of the Church of England and the approximately 1,300 churches of the Church in Wales, in which different-sex marriage may be solemnised. A further observation might be that same-sex marriage coexists with the Civil Partnership Act 2004, two pieces of legislation living side by side, both of whom refuse to recognise the kinship bonds of those whose relationships don't fall within the square hole of the monogamous heterosexual or homosexual couple.
I never wanted my love to be special. I wanted an everyday kind of love, the kind of love that other folk would bore of, an unremarkable kind of spark of love. I never wanted to be path-breaking. I wanted to be on a sofa warmed by you, held by a world that found us dull, predictable, doing life as other folk can do. I'm not as film or a worthy novel. I don't want to be new or kitsch or brave. I want to lie here lazy in your arms, dear. The chance to be a tired and worn cliche. But here we are, a question or a statement. a fear or hope folk feel entitled to. The only solace left for me, my darling, is that I share this remarkable love with you. The only solace left for me, my darling, is that I share this remarkable love with you.
Thank you, SJ. So let's take a step back for a moment and imagine a child born into a society where same-sex relationships are so hotly contested as immoral.
Who are we, this government or this country, to redefine the term marriage that has meant one man and one woman across cultures, across ages, across geographical boundaries?
What, I ask, is the Conservative Party for? Indeed, we are alienating people who have voted for us for all their lives, leaving them with no one to vote for.
Marriage is a sacrament, and a sacrament is under the authority of the church, not of the state.
This change now does redefine marriage. It means for millions and millions of people who are married, the meaning of marriage is changed. And there is a real sense of anger among many people who are married that the government thinks that it has the ability, any government thinks that it has the ability to change the definition of an institution like marriage. I have just never felt that this is what we should be focusing on.
Heterosexual couples who just feel that the equilibrium of their life, their upbringing, their attitudes is being rocked by all of this.
Those of us who believe in not tampering with a definition of marriage that has survived for millennia and is recognised across the globe have been called bigots. You know, that's very strange. As some of the opposition to redefining marriage is actually coming from homosexuals themselves.
Why should Parliament at this time be redefining the important social institution of marriage? Why doesn't it recognise the enduring distinctive value of marriage being a relationship between a man and a woman?
The state has no right to redefine people's marriages. The state has no right to do that.
My right honourable friend explained to me why the government is so hell-bent on upsetting so many thousands of our citizens in normal marriages at this, especially at this time.
And now imagine that same child at school, in love with her teacher. I give you Blue Danube Assembly. Blue Danube Assembly. Day after day, children shuffle in, fill the bleached hall like air fills a lung. Anthea Weekly on her burnished throne, fingering notes of morning has broken. Mouth set in a lipstick bloom, eyes more bedroom than classroom. Every morning I pray I'll be the one she beckons to her smoky bosom. A strip of lace as she bends towards me. Put the record on, she whispers gently. I leap to my feet to balance the stylus. Violins begin, sotto voce, desirous. Cymbals crash, I sway and swoon, tapping my toes to drums and bassoon. Feet keeping pace as we dance, front to back. I waltz out through the smallest crack in the highest window. So this child grows up and dreams of having a family. What are her legal choices? So let's consider first assisted reproductive technology. So apologies to those of you who already know what that is, but as somebody said to me, shouldn't that be HRT? So no, it's ART. Just a very brief explanation of what ART is. So it describes different ways of conceiving a child. For example, intrauterine insemination, also known as IUI, involves the delivery of sperm directly into the uterus. Intracervical insemination, known as ICI, involves inserting sperm into the cervix through the vagina using a syringe filled with donor sperm. Then there is also in vitro fertilization. In vitro means in a dish. IVF is when the fertilization of an egg and sperm happens outside the body and in a laboratory setting. IVF is more complicated than the first two approaches, as a woman needs to undergo ovarian stimulation and egg retrieval procedures. And the cost of IVF is also considerably higher. So that's the end of the science. I'm not a scientist. One more. Reciprocal IVF is an option mostly used in lesbian couples who want to involve both partners in the process of pregnancy. So one woman's eggs are retrieved to be fertilized by donor sperm, and a resulting embryo is then transferred into her partner's uterus. This way, both women are biologically involved in the pregnancy. When the Human Fertilization and Embryology Act 2008 was passed, updating and amending previous law in this area, it enabled both women in a civil partnership to be recorded as legal parents from their child's birth, whether conceived at home or in a fertility clinic. And this in part applies to lesbian couples who are not civilly partnered. However, these couples must conceive through a licensed fertility clinic. So this was a change in the law that may seem like a progressive move in same-sex reproductive law, making it much easier for lesbian parents to legally parent together. However, you can feel the however coming, can't you? When interrogating this gay-friendly move through a queer lens, problems do begin to arise. For example, queer academics argue that the law is built on a privileging of marriage and civil partnerships over other types of relationships, to the complete disregard of polygamous, trans, and other non-traditional family formations. Also, the requirement to use a fertility clinic means that the entire process is based on the assumption of infertility, arising from its history as a source of fertility treatment for heterosexual couples. In July 2022, Helen and Sarah appeared in the High Court. The couple had waived their right in family law to be anonymous and featured in a Pink News headline story that ran, "Queer mum forced to adopt her own child after being refused birth certificate, wins High Court case." Sarah's story goes like this. In 2014, so the court case was 2020, the child was born in 2014, so that's a thing to bear in mind. The Cambridgeshire Register Office refused to register me as one of the mothers of our newly born child. I could not have my name entered onto my son's birth certificate because I was not the father, and there could only be one mother. There was no place for me. I queried her response, but she was adamant that unless I was the father of our son, and I clearly wasn't, then my name was not permitted on the document. In hindsight, of course, I wish I had pushed harder. But when in such an official setting and going through such an official process, I trusted the professional sat in front of us and their competence. The flippant, disrespectful and indignant attitude, tone and comments of the registrar made me feel like I was stupid to ask or expect to be named on the birth certificate, and that I was not deserving of such official recognition by having my name included. As if I was a random stranger Helen had just found outside on the street and taken in for moral support. I was told that I would have to adopt our baby by means of completing a step-parent adoption, and that we would have to wait until he was at least 6 months old before doing so. We were both somewhat confused because we had signed all the necessary consent forms for me to have full parental responsibility for any child born as a result of the IVF procedure under the law I've just described to you. I remember when I signed those forms how proud, privileged and happy I felt to know that we could do this together and as equals, as mothers. Even before we could receive IVF treatment, we faced a series of questions to satisfy the clinic that we would make suitable parents, and that we realised and understood the commitment we were undertaking. We had done everything required to evidence we were creating a family together, that I was committed to both Helen and my child, and to making sure our child would be safe, supported, loved and cared for their entire life. We had spent so much time and effort discussing, planning, preparing for and going through the treatment. We had our precious son. We had made it a reality. And within those few minutes, I felt all my pride and identity as a mother being stripped away from me. Those few hostile, dismissive and inconsiderate comments because of my gender were devastating. I was and am our baby's mother. And now I would like to invite you to listen to SJ reading a poem by Ellen Bass, Bone of My Bone and Flesh of My Flesh.
I can't always refer to the woman I love, my children's other mother, as my darling, my beloved, sugar in my bowl. No, I need a common utilitarian word that calls no more attention to itself than nouns like grass, bread, house. The terms husband and wife are perfect for that. Hassling with the PG and E or dropping off dry cleaning, you don't want to say, the light of my life doesn't like starch. Don't suggest spouse, a hideous word, and partner is sterile as a boardroom. Could we not afford a term for the woman who carried that girl in her arms when she was still all promise? That boy curled inside her womb. And today, when I go to kiss her and she says, not now, I'm reading, still, she deserves a syllable or two, if only so I can express how furious she makes me. But maybe it's better this way. No puny pencil stub of a word. Maybe these are exactly the times to drag out the whole galaxy of endearments. Buttercup, I should say. Lambkin, mon petit chou, set down war and peace just for a moment and lift your ruby lips to mine. And talking to the dishwasher repairman, the vacuum cleaner sales clerk, the woman in the Blue Cross billing department, I could explain that I'd already sent my copay for my soulmate, my duckling, my chocolate-covered cream puff. Maybe it would brighten her day too. Hello, I might say. You precious, you jewel, O queen amongst queens, darling honey pie, angel, my sweet patootie.
Thank you, SJ. So although under the law, one child can now be born with 5 parents rather than 2, the legislating of such processes seems to have assimilated this into traditional family models. For example, legally, it is impossible to name more than 2 people on a birth certificate. Therefore, if 2 women are to legally parent, then the child is unable to have a legal father, let alone 4th or 5th parents. This then discourages the formation of more complex co-parenting relationships, always prioritizing one couple over the other. Not only does this limiting law restrict co-parenting options, it also erases other less traditional relationships, such as polyamorous relationships. Stereotypical views of polygamous families as unstable are only fostered by their invisibility, both within society and within the law. In addition, it continues to use gendered concepts, with motherhood being identified through gestation. Again, apologies for the explanation, but I'll do it anyway. That is pregnancy and giving birth. And fatherhood through either genetics and/or relationship to the mother. This continues the state imposition of the heterosexual, homosexual, and male-female binary within the law, dismissing any fluidity as unimaginable. Trans reproductive relationships become complex under these laws. For example, although it is now possible for a legally recognized man to give birth, it is not clear whether he would be treated as the father or the mother.
One and one is two, two by two is the law. They're trying to make it all go back to the way it was before. One and one is two, two by two is the law. They're trying to make it all go back to the way it was before.
A field of mothers. Once upon a time, there was a mother. Her great limbs sheltered the children in summer like a canopy of leaves, and a patchwork blanket sewn by her mother and her mother before, squares of worn cotton and corduroy, blues and browns, held the weight of her baking. Another mother wandered restless through knee-high grass, gathering frogs and toads to sketch their skin in a notebook filled with dried beech, maple and oak, a host of wild flowers. Storksbill, meadow vetchling, forget-me-nots, pressed between thick paper leaves, preserved worlds. A third mother climbed trees, scraping her knees, calling to the children from high branches, a lighthouse. Careful, don't fall. You can see the island from here. Her light bounced from rock to wave, keeping the darkness safe. Together, they grew a knot of roots, tethered leaves, tendrils of their days, gentle winds dispersing their inheritance like seeds. There's an academic called Eliza Garwood who's recently done some research into queer families, and I'm drawing on her in the next part of what I'm going to explore. So studies have shown that queer families are able to weave complex kinship networks and family structures in new and innovative ways to support the raising of children. Recent research drawing on interviews with 22 adult children raised by LGBTQ parents show how storytelling around identity, conception, and kinship can create a space where alternative family stories work to build a sense of connection between parents, LGBTQ communities, and histories. However, the studies also indicate the continuing relevance of the traditional family, noting that friendship is not always enough to sustain a strong and enduring parental relationship with a third or fourth parent. These additional parents are often demoted to the position of family friend, a person of lesser social and emotional status. This shows us that the legal demotion of third or fourth parents, often sperm donors and their partners, frequently leads to the limiting of family structure, down to a more standardized two-parent model. Therefore, despite the fact that these dominant models of family can be resisted, the power internalized through the traditional family model can perhaps never be fully escaped. Yet. There is also the issue of what happens if a lesbian couple and their known sperm donor fall out. In one case, a same-sex couple, let's call them Madeline and Sarah, had had a civil partnership and decided they wanted a child. They were looking for someone who wanted to be a biological father and have a relationship with their child, but did not want to be an equal co-parent. They entered into an agreement with a gay man called John. I've changed the names, by the way, to protect their privacy, who would be named on the birth certificate, and that Sarah would be a legal step-parent, with the idea that all three would have equal legal rights. At the beginning, all went well. But over time, the relationship broke down, and Madeline had another child by a different donor. John got lawyers, psychologists, and the local authority involved in a dispute over contact with his son, and there were 7 court hearings before the whole case was transferred to the High Court. The possibility of a 5-day High Court hearing loomed if all parents couldn't agree a way forward. And how much has all of this cost? Apart from the tens of thousands of pounds needed to pay solicitors, barristers, expert witnesses, psychologists, and therapists, there is the emotional toll of having your entire life paraded in public. This case is important because it highlights the unforeseeable emotional and financial implications of decisions taken in relation to queer parenting and family choices. And there is a chain of cases between lesbian couples and known sperm donors with whom informal insemination arrangements have been made. The cases indicate that the position of the non-biological mother, who some academics have referred to as the cuckoo in the nest, and also the sperm donor can be placed in the position of the cuckoo in the nest, potential to undermine those parties, those people in the relationship, not only by the biological link of the birth mother, but also by that of the genetic father. And they also illustrate the potential for legal and practical complexities to arise even in subsisting stable lesbian partnerships where known donors are used.
Our love was a tree, we were the branches, rooted but growing, entangled, expansive and free. Relishing foes we reached for together, fed by the sunlight, stood by the breeze. But the ink of officials cannot write on branches. We were illegible in the eyes of the state, so they cut us to size. They pulped and they molded us into paper to keep records straight. In a sense, we were cold and we were captured in the paper that laid upon their desk. But there's no life in what their ink runs neatly over. Do they know what they killed as they compressed? Our love was a tree, we were the branches, rooted but growing, entangled, expansive and free, relishing force we reach for together, fed by the sunlight, stood by the breeze.
In addition to the cost of potential litigation, there's also a gay tax in IVF law that disadvantages both lesbian couples and single women. This is because women who want to access IVF must have spent a period of time trying to conceive which for lesbians and single women comes at great cost. These women are required to undergo 6 to 12 cycles of artificial insemination before their infertility can be determined, and these are unfunded, with the exception of Yorkshire and Humber, whose clinical commissioning group have funded those cycles, but that's very rare. So the reality is that same-sex couples have to self-fund 6 cycles of treatment, which on average amount to £2,000 each, so a minimum of £12,000 if all 6 IUIs are exhausted to demonstrate subfertility. The price of sperm, alongside the sperm shortage in the UK, has also fueled a black market of sperm donation on social media, according to the research, enabling greater access to donors for those who are unable to meet the costs of regulated sperm banks. The use of donor sperm outside of regulated clinics invites a plethora of legal issues alongside ethical and medical issues, where donors could, if they so choose, legally assume fatherhood of any children born, and mothers could, if they so choose, seek financial assistance from donors up until the child reaches 18. Recent research has also found that poor single LGBTQ+ and black and minority ethnic women are at a significant disadvantage when attempting to access regulated donor insemination. And I would now like to invite Ella Jordan to read a quotation from a book by Claire Lynch called Small on Motherhoods, which is a book about a lesbian couple's experience of going through IVF successfully. One of the mothers had twins, and Ella's going to read a passage about that.
The babies are hospital patients, but they're also just babies. While the medical staff manage the oxygen in their blood or scan their brains for abnormalities, Beth and I tentatively enter parenthood. We learn to exchange nappies through incubator portholes, dipping cotton wool into a bowl of sterile water, wiping tiny bottoms in nests of wires and blankets. Every millimetre of milk in, every wet or soiled nappy out, has to be recorded on the clipboards hanging at the ends of their incubators. We clean our fingernails like surgeons. We fold and refold spare blankets. We learn how to hold the tiny syringes of milk, linking them to the feeding tubes in their noses. We try to wear shirts we can unbutton so that we can hold our daughters against our chests, warming them against our skin. The nothing weights of them. One girl, 1.5 bags of rice, the other, 2 bags of sugar. And there is often confusion, cases of mistaken identity, not between the twin sisters, who are labelled securely at ankle and wrist, but their mothers, who break the rules by being plural. This muddling. The nurse who thinks I'm their aunt, the nurse who thinks Beth is a surrogate.
Thank you, Ella. So turning now to the position of transgender parents. In English law, and I'm drawing on the work of Bridget Clark, who's researched this area in both South Africa and the UK. In English law, it is not necessary for transgender individuals to have had any surgeries that may render them sterile in order to obtain a legal change of gender. Thus, the potential legal barrier to trans men gestating does not exist in England. Some trans persons have stated that they would prefer not to have invasive surgeries or medicalise the issue. Many trans people undertake a social or medical transition that does not involve surgery to remove their reproductive organs. Therefore, transition does not necessarily take away the ability to reproduce. In terms of both the common law and statute, the person who gestates and gives birth to the child is regarded as the child's legal mother, regardless of biological connection. The Gender Recognition Act provides that the fact that a person's gender has become the acquired gender does not affect the status of the person as the father or mother of a child. Trans persons who obtain gender recognition certificates may already have existing children, thus creating legally male mothers and legally female fathers. In 2015, in one case, Joe, who was married to another woman, was the biological father of 2 children. Joe transitioned after the birth of the second child and was legally recognised as a woman. The state, however, refused Joe's request to be registered as a parent or mother on the birth certificates of the 2 children. She brought a court case arguing that the requirement that she be shown as father was a breach of her right and that of her children to respect for their private life. She lost her case because the court said it was not in the public interest that the children had the right, and the children had the right to know who their biological father was. In another well-known case in 2019, Freddie McConnell was registered as female at birth and later transitioned to become a legally recognised man. When he decided to have a child, he suspended the programme of testosterone therapy to reinvigorate his reproductive system. He actively engaged in arranging for IUI insemination treatment in order to achieve a viable pregnancy by the artificial insemination of his ova with donor sperm. Freddie then applied for a certificate confirming that he was male. Freddie subsequently underwent IUI fertility treatment at a licensed clinic. The treatment was successful and Freddie gave birth to a son after making a film about his pregnancy called Seahorse, if you haven't already seen it. Freddie became the first known trans man to have given birth in England. However, he was informed that he would have to be registered on the child's birth certificate as the child's mother, although the registration could be in his current male name of Alfred Freddie McConnell. This was despite his request to be registered as father, or if not father, then parent or gestational parent. Freddie brought a court case because he felt that he and his son's right to a private life had been breached. Again, the court held that it was not in the public interest to take away from the child the right to know the identity of their parents, including the right to know the identity of the person who gave birth to them as their mother. So, I thought it might be helpful to summarise the current position with, I'm going to use Kath and Scoobs as props here. In front of the piano. So, can you hear me okay? Yeah. So, currently the position is this. A trans man married to a cisgender woman who consents to his wife receiving treatment through a licensed clinic will be registered on the child's birth certificate as the father. So if we say this man is the father of child number 1, and this would be the case even where the trans man and father had his eggs used in the treatment. If this trans father then later conceived himself and gave birth to the couple's second child, that one over there, he would be registered as the mother in respect of the second and younger child, despite the fact that he would be registered as the father of the first child that was born during the same marriage. So the same person would be both the mother and the father of these 2 children. If, can you turn over the page, please? If both partners in a marriage were transgender and they conceived a child naturally, the trans man would be registered as the child's mother, and the trans woman would be the father, thereby producing a legal outcome that is completely out of touch with the experience of the family. Okay, thank you. I hope that helped. Maybe you didn't need that. Yep, I'm now handing over to the singers.
Everybody needs a daddy to do daddy things with them.
Football.
As I was saying, everybody needs a daddy to do daddy things with them. Everybody needs a papa, a pappy, an appa, a baba, an abba, a pair to care for them. A paternal referent.
Now that's a compliment.
Sexual difference.
We have confidence in this, absolutely.
For it makes sense, you see. Anthropologically, sociologically, epistemologically,
the center of our thought.
And the scientists agree with us.
Actually, no, the scientists don't agree with you.
Everybody needs a daddy. Everybody needs a daddy. Everybody needs a daddy. My daddy told me so.
So to sum up, so far, the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Act 2008 can be argued to bolster ingrained notions regarding what families should look like. Those who do not conform to these ideals, single parent, trans, non-binary, polygamous or other non-conventional sexualities, become stigmatised or unintelligible. Therefore, arguably, rather than being an unquestioned victory for LGBTQ+ rights, these reproductive laws draw on limiting narratives, restricting who can be recognised as successful, productive, legal families. And I'd now like to hand over to SJ, who's going to read a poem by Chen Chen.
I invite my parents to a dinner party by Chen Chen. In the invitation, I tell them for the 17th time, the 4th in writing, that I am gay. In the invitation, I include a picture of my boyfriend and write, "You have met him 2 times, but this time you will ask him things other than, can you pass the whatever? You will ask him about him. You will enjoy dinner. You will be enjoyable. Please RSVP." They RSVP. They come. They sit at the table and ask my boyfriend, the first of the conversation starters I slip them upon arrival, "How is work going?" I'm like the kids in Home Alone, orchestrating every movement of a proper family, as if a pair of scary yet deeply incompetent burglars is watching from the outside. My boyfriend responds in his chipper way. I pass my father a bowl of the fishball soup. So comforting, isn't it? My mother smiles her best, sitting with her son's boyfriend, who is a boy, smile. I smile my hooray for doing a little better smile. Everybody eats soup. Then my mother turns to me and whispers in Mandarin, "Is he coming with you for Thanksgiving? My good friend is, and she wouldn't like this." I'm like the kid in Home Alone, pulling on the strings that make my cardboard mother more motherly, except she is not cardboard. She is already exceedingly my mother, waiting for my answer. While my father opens up a Boston Globe when the invitation clearly stated no security blankets. I am like the kid in Home Alone, except the home is my apartment and I am much older and not alone and not the one who needs to learn and has to remind me, what's in this recipe again? My boyfriend says to my mother, as if they have always easily talked, as though no one has told him many times what a non-linear slapstick meets slasher flick meets psychological pit he is now co-starring in. Remind me, he says, to my family.
Thank you, SJ. Moving on now to surrogacy. You may have seen that last week, same-sex marriage and same-sex adoption became legal in Greece, although surrogacy is not permitted for same-sex couples. In England, surrogacy for same-sex couples is legal, under the same law as those for assisted reproduction. Usually, a couple will create embryos with donated eggs at a fertility clinic, which are then transferred to a gestational surrogate, or by matching with a surrogate who will provide eggs as well as carrying the child. Following the birth of the child, parental rights are then legally transferred to the intended parents, and they must have the consent of the surrogate mother. This all happens through court proceedings and with a social worker. In August 2015, Mark and Alvin, a male couple, and Jane and David, a straight couple, signed a surrogacy agreement. Mark and Jane travelled to a clinic abroad for the embryo transfer using embryos created from Mark and Alvin's sperm and a donor egg from a Spanish egg donor, which resulted in Jane becoming pregnant. A DNA test later confirmed that Mark was the biological father. The relationship between the parties deteriorated in February 2016 to the extent that by early March 2016 there was no communication between them. Jane's health had deteriorated and she had to have surgery. At some point in late March 2016, Jane and David decided they were not going to hand over the child to Mark and Alvin as agreed. Jane gave birth and both she and the baby suffered ill health immediately afterwards. The day before the birth, Jane and David wrote a legal letter to Mark and Alvin informing them that they were not prepared to follow their surrogacy agreement and they would not be giving their consent to a parental order. Jane and David registered the birth with their chosen name rather than the name chosen by Mark and Alvin. Mark and Alvin issued legal proceedings and they were then allowed to share the care for the baby. All four had to give evidence in the proceedings, and the judge said this: "For all the adults involved, who all clearly love this baby, the one thing I know is that their dispute and this contested litigation has been a harrowing experience for them all." The judge went on to say that this case highlights, once again, the consequences of not having a properly supported and regulated framework to underpin arrangements of this kind. Ultimately, the judge found for Mark and Alvin, and the baby went to live with them, and they were registered as the legal parents with 6 yearly visits to the baby's birth mother. And I'm now going to hand over to Kath Long, who's going to read a poem called Mythbusters version 3.
Mythbusters version 3 by Jay Farley. What if money was just bread and economic growth was just growth? What if patriarchy was a footnote and normal was everyone? What if market forces was a veg stall in St. John's? What if Eton was an Ofsted requires improvement struggling sports academy merging with its neighbouring school so it didn't close down? What if we were taught how to disagree with each other? What if divide and conquer was a kind of math and hierarchy was a quaint parlour game? What if propaganda clenched its fist, ground its teeth, and just walked past? What if climate change was a rain cloud? What if altruism was impossible because we live in a world where all things are connected? What if I bought the ticket? What if I kissed you? What if your tears weren't crocodile? What if I didn't care what you think? What if you didn't leave me all alone? What if you didn't leave me alone? What if my heart wasn't evicted? What if unconditional was unconditional? What if greed, if pride, if money, if bullshit, if single-use lives, if washed up, if selfish? What if we were animals? What if we were nature? What if we were real?
Thank you, Kath. Tam and Ronnie are a male same-sex couple who have been in a relationship for approximately 20 years and have cohabited for the last 17 years. They moved abroad in 2018 so that Tam could take up employment as a teacher. They wanted to become parents and considered both adoption and surrogacy. They chose surrogacy as they wished for there to be a biological link between child and parent. They did lots of research and chose surrogacy in Colombia because the process was gay-friendly and affordable. Tam also instructed specialist surrogacy solicitors in England so that they could ensure all the necessary legal requirements were met for an eventual parental order in England. Tam and Ronnie travelled to Colombia, chose an egg donor and a surrogate, Maria, a single woman. Maria became pregnant with twins. Sadly, the twins were born prematurely and one twin died at birth. Tam and Ronnie cared for the baby until Tam had to return to work in a country that was not England. Let's call it workland. By the time the baby was well enough to travel restrictions were in place because of the pandemic. And neither Ronnie nor the baby were permitted to enter workland. In the circumstances, the most feasible option was for Ronnie and the baby to travel to the UK with a view to onward travel to be reunited with Tam in workland as soon as restrictions allowed. So, Ronnie and baby flew to England on one of the final humanitarian flights from Colombia. On arrival in the UK, the absence of the correct paperwork set in train a series of events which led to the police taking the baby away from Ronnie's care. She was placed with foster carers. There then followed a highly intrusive investigation by social workers, psychologists, and lawyers into the suitability of Tam and Ronnie as parents. The reports were universally positive, and the court eventually granted parental control of the baby to Tam and Ronnie. Yay. Although this case has a happy ending, it is hard to imagine the trauma all three members of this family had to go through to get there.
These are the laws.
These are the laws.
These are the laws.
These are the laws. These are the laws.
These are the laws made by the lords, the cold, the sick
And predators who stole our pride, our families, who blamed us all for spreading disease.
These are the laws.
These are the laws. These are the laws.
These are the laws.
These are the laws. These are the laws.
So now to move on to the final part of the talk, and this part is about adoption. Before the implementation of the Adoption and Children Act 2002, which came into force in 2005, children in England could not be adopted by people who officially identified as gay or lesbian, as they were explicitly excluded under the Children Act 1989. The Adoption and Children Act 2002 changed that, as it stated that an application to adopt a child in England and Wales could be made by either a single person or a couple, and there was no necessity to be married or be heterosexual. 20 years later, in 2022, there were 82,170 looked after children in England, an all-time high. According to new statistics published by the Department for Education, 1 in 5 adoptions in England in 2023 were to same-sex couples. That is 600 adoptions, which is both the highest total number and proportion on record in the country in relation to same-sex couples. LGBTQ plus people, however, still report high expectations of discrimination from foster and adoption agencies. And I'm now going to play you a very short video which tells you a story of one lesbian's adoption journey.
My name's Jackie. I'm a lesbian. I'm married. I think been married for about coming up to 17 or 18 years. I've got 3 lovely children and I live in a small village outside Cambridge. I'm 50. I'm Asian. I unfortunately support Arsenal for my sins, and I have this strange attraction and fascination with superheroes, so I love Spider-Man and most Marvel characters. Why did I adopt? Well, we had 2 children a number of years ago that my partner gave birth to via a fertility treatment, and they were beautiful and they're everything we ever wanted, and they were full blood siblings. But one of the agreements we always had when we had children was that we would adopt, and it seemed like the ideal time for us to adopt. We still had a little bit of energy left in us. We decided to approach the local authority first, but because we were looking for a mixed race child to fit in with our family setup, we were suggested that we go to an independent agency, because the local authority were quite honest and frank with us when they came out and did an initial assessment saying we just don't have many mixed race children around the county. So we approached an independent agency and went through the process. And back then the deadlines were much longer then, and we went through much faster than the local authority one. The assessment was long. I won't lie, it was exposing at times, because they go back to everything that you did in your entire life, be it work, relationships, childhood, remembering your earliest childhood memories. But it was really, really interesting to see how it all came together, and also made me realise that if things go wrong in your life, that's not a bad thing. It won't be held against you. You won't be thrown out of the process. And actually, it's a good thing if you have a few bumps in your life and get over them, because it shows that you're resilient. Once we got through the process, we started looking for a child that we could fit into our family. And we were quite proactive about it. So we went to adoption exchange events, and we found some information about our little boy at a stand, and luckily the family finder and social worker was there, and they had the CPR there, which we read, and we kind of went, yes, we want to do this. And things moved really quickly from them. We were linked very quickly. The social workers came down and visited us, and we started introductions during the Easter holidays. We didn't tell our children because we had quite a bad experience initially. We were matched with a child earlier, a few months before, and we decided not to proceed with that and stopped the introductions because it just didn't feel right for the family. We told the kids the first time round, and they were devastated when we said we were stopping the process. So we kept it quiet this time. We had a fantastic time meeting the foster carers, who were brilliant and really welcoming. It was quite intense, a period of introductions, but it was brilliant just to get to know our little boys' routines, which are really, really vital in terms of building consistency and making them feel as comfortable as they can possibly be when they transition to their forever home. He was placed with us in 2013 at 14 months old. His story was that he was in a mother and baby placement, and his mother left after a number of weeks, unable to cope with looking after him, and so he was in foster care for the duration. He's an amazing little child. He's now 7, and we're really proud of him, and he fits right into our family. We do have an unusual extended family because his birth mother has gone on to have 3 other children from a different father, and so we are now friends with the adopters of those 3 children, and we're going to see them within the next few weeks. We also keep in touch with the foster carers, who are a massive part of his life, and they have the stories about what happened to him when he was in hospital, when he was born, and all the stories about when he was a baby, which he sometimes shows a real great interest into learning about. So you have a rich and varied tapestry in terms of family, which is a great thing actually, because families are not as fixed as they were a number of years ago. What I would say is that it is really hard sometimes when you have your dark moments saying, why did I do this? But it's worth it. It really is, because you see them develop, you see them feel safe, you see them feel secure. When they call your house their home, it feels like you've done the right thing. The work you've done has really, really worked. And I think, I would recommend adoption to all LGBT people out there, because it's such a worthwhile thing to do, and you make a massive difference.
So, by way of conclusion, as Audre Lorde famously said, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. In the context of queer families and the law, this wisdom sings out as a call to nurture language and imagination, song and voice, as an act of both belonging and resistance, insider and outsider, domestic and wild. The law places restrictions on the possibilities for queer families, But we have the tools to resist and reshape our families around them. Thank you.
Love, love, love. Love, love, love. Love, 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 love.
That's what it's all about. I don't know, do we have time for questions? Surabhi? If we haven't worn everyone out.
Hello. Thanks so much, Katie, SJ, Scoops, and Kath. I had no idea that those were the laws. I want to give some time for you to ask questions, whether they're about the laws or the courts or whatever it is that you want to ask questions about. Just raise your hand, I'll come to you. And I'm sure Katie and the others would be happy to answer. Only Katie will be happy. Anybody? Yep, Susie?
That was really moving. Thank you, all of you. Katie, if you could change one existing bit of law, what would it be? You're only allowed one.
I think it would be to recognise trans and non-binary folks in the legislation. I think that would be the most obvious change that could be made that would probably make the biggest difference.
Anybody else with questions or comments?
Did you all know about that, the legal framework? No. Well, that's good. So you've learnt something. I don't know how many of you in here are lawyers.
I'm a lawyer.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, not so great.
I'm Anna. I'm a lecturer at the School of Law.
Oh, great.
Thank you so much for this amazing event. It's mostly just to pick your brain on something, because you mentioned Greece. I'm from Greece, so I'm familiar with the recent change in the legal framework, which obviously is a positive step. You talked about surrogacy, and if I'm not mistaken, one of the main things in the existing law for surrogacy in Greece, which is relatively permissive compared to other countries still, is that there cannot be payment for the surrogate mother.
Commercial surrogacy is against the law.
I just wonder what your thoughts are on this issue.
So I'm not an expert in surrogacy. I think the intention behind that is to protect the surrogate so that it can't exploit women who enter into surrogacy. So for me, you know, that is a good thing. But I think from the cases that I described, it's an incredibly difficult and poorly regulated area, and it's one that's often used by gay men. So often in the news, isn't it, that famous Elton John, I think, and Tom Daley are the sort of two superstars that have very publicly entered into surrogacy arrangements that seem to work for them, but you never know really, do you? But yeah, so I think that's probably a good thing, but the law in general, from the cases that we can see, seem not to provide sufficient protection that prevent people getting involved in this kind of litigation, or allowing the state, for example, when they took the baby away from those two men the man who came into the country because of the lack of paperwork. I mean, that story there is one of there were a lot of assumptions, there was a lot of prejudice against him, the father, because of his childhood, because of what happened to him in his childhood. It's a very, do you know the case?
I think I do.
Yeah, so it's a very awful case, isn't it? I mean, they won eventually, but
no, of course, it might lead also to exploitation. Like, it can become a trade, essentially. Yeah. But yeah, it's very interesting what you just mentioned, because I think in Greece, the reason why it's also not becoming a bit broader now, despite the change of the law, is that only the woman essentially can petition.
Yeah.
Can ask for a surrogacy on the basis that they are not able to carry a child.
Yeah.
And that's why a single man cannot actually have a surrogacy agreement, or two men cannot, but one single woman can have a child. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anna and Katie, for that wonderful dialogue. Any further questions, curiosities, comments? Yep.
Hello, thank you so much for that. That was really wonderful. I'm a PhD student in London, working on comparative socio-legal studies for same-sex women who are trying to build families in Canada and England and Wales. And I'm just wondering, regarding the number of legal parents that can be on a birth certificate in England and Wales, it's 2. There is a jurisdiction in Canada, British Columbia, where you can have 3 legal parents on a birth certificate, but it's very limited in terms of the scope, so there needs to be assisted reproduction, and it's limited to adding the biological father, for example, who is a sperm donor. And there are limitations with that, whether it in some ways renders lesbian couples particularly as incomplete and seeking to add a father to that picture.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what your thoughts on like the optimal, potentially adding more legal parents to a birth certificate would be, keeping in mind there are other considerations of what it means to potentially encourage a legal father being present, but in very limited circumstances of what like a multi-parent family can be.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I really don't have an answer. I should prepare better for these questions, but you would have thought that that legal step in Canada was a step in the right direction, but as you have said, arguably, it further imposes state-sanctioned models on a family, doesn't it? So, I mean, you know, I go back to Audre Lorde. You can't use the law to fix these kinds of problems. Or not problems, but to regulate new family structures. So I think it's really difficult, but I think it's really interesting to compare the approaches that are being taken in South Africa is another country, I think, where they have more progressive laws. But personally, as I don't know, the lecture reflects, I think maybe the law, it just as a state-sanctioned imposition on queer lives, there's such a huge history, isn't there, of oppression that I think it's really difficult to imagine laws that could accommodate queer families. I don't know, what do you think?
I'm undecided. It's a really big question. From a personal perspective, I just think that it should be consensual. If you want platonic people present within a family structure, then there should be a consent-based legal access to that and responsibility over that child.
Yeah.
But I think that, again, it goes beyond what I think people who are relatively open-minded may see as, okay, when does it become too much? I think there is a purpose to a diet in some sense where there's core decisions about schooling and health, and it can get very overwhelming and impractical if you have too many cooks in the kitchen. But yeah, I don't have an answer for that either.
I mean, there are models, aren't there, around, I don't know if you'll look at other jurisdictions as well in your research, but there are models around the world of lots of different ways of accommodating different kinship groups. But, you know, I think this is where, for me, like the creative tools are so helpful because they allow us to use our imagination in a way that kind of academic tools don't. So that was really, I think, the main message of the talk, really, is the power of imagination and the power of using like music and song and yeah, I don't know if that like worked for you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. That was a fantastic talk. I just wanted to ask, you mentioned briefly that you thought the next really important step would be legal recognition of non-binary people, and I wondered if you could speak at all to where you think that might be heading, in what direction, like what the next step would be in that direction, like any more details on that?
Well, I don't know if you watched the debate in the House of Commons quite recently. I think it was only about a year ago. They had a debate on legal recognition of non-binary people, and the level of the debate was extremely poor. So, you know, I didn't consider there was any informed view of what it means to be non-binary, what it might mean to have legal recognition of non-binary people. So I'm sorry to say that I think there's a really long way to go. Of course, the government have issued guidance to schools, haven't they, in relation to non-binary children, right? So it is in their minds, and I don't know what the next government will do, but I just think, I mean, you should tell me, you know, we should all talk about this really, but people just don't understand, do they? You know, the lack of acceptance or awareness or meaning of gender expansion. Is that a term we can use? Gender expansion, but you know, the right of people to express themselves in relation to their gender and to have that recognised with respect is where I would come from, and I really don't know when or how the law is going to take a step forward in that regard. But you know, campaigning and all that kind of thing is a good idea. Writing poems and songs, and just being... do you know any high-profile non-binary people? I don't. I can't think of a single one. Can you?
Mae Martin, Ruby
Rose.
Rose.
All right. Okay, yeah,
lots.
that's true.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, look at me, I'm a bit old. I do know Mae Martin, though. Yeah, so...
Yeah, it's education, isn't it, as you say?
Yeah, but that's a really interesting thing about the generations. Like it's... How old is Mae Martin? Who knows? Who cares? Yeah, so it's a young... I think it's an important thing to recognise, though, isn't it? That when you see the debates in the House of Commons, it's old people. Whereas it's a thing that's in schools, it's a huge... I have a 14-year-old daughter, it's a huge thing, I know, in lots of schools, isn't it, for kids? Yeah.
Hi, yes. I come at this from a scientific background. I'm doing a master's and I'm at the very start of a career in ART.
Oh, wow. Not HRT.
Not HRT. What do you think we could do at that very first point in the fertility clinic to make it a more inclusive environment for everyone? Because it is still very heterosexual centred.
Well, I mean, not have fertility clinics would be, you know, change the language, get gay, LGBTQ plus people working, get them trained, get an awareness of, you know, it's all of that. Yeah. Do you... are you involved in a clinic?
I've been in today
Yeah.
to shadow, yeah.
Okay.
I'd
And
like
how-
to be an embryologist.
Okay,
so
wow.
In the lab side of things. But I notice, like, as soon as you go in, as a queer person, you think of people who are queer and making families in a different way, but actually it's still like at least 80%
incredibly traditional,
heterosexual couples.
Yeah. So changing the language would be the first thing I would say that would make a big difference around how queer people might feel going into those clinics.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, could I follow up on that conversation,
Certainly
please?
could.
So, if I could ask you about your initial impressions from the visit, some initial thoughts you had about some small things that could be changed immediately. Did you have any thoughts or impressions that you could share with us?
Sorry, I feel like this has become a...
No, please,
thing
yeah,
now.
fantastic, yeah.
The thing that strikes me first is that the HFEA have a whole framework, and it's the legal aspects, right? So, but they have a male form and a female form. So immediately, you've
with
got
that binary.
a whole different process for anyone who doesn't fit into those categories.
Yeah.
But that makes the whole process more complicated. So it's set up to be for a man and a woman.
Yeah.
And it's not integrated into the system.
Yeah.
As well as it could be. And yeah, the words like, I wasn't very aware of the birth certificate stuff. So the words like having to have a mother and a father instead of maybe a gestational parent, which would fit everyone a lot better. Not necessarily just LGBTQ plus people, but people who are entering into surrogacy with like a surrogate and then a heterosexual couple would still maybe want to acknowledge the surrogate.
Yeah.
So yeah, the wording is a problem, I think.
Yeah, all about the language, isn't it? Yeah. And not just in the law, I think just generally in the way that all of the whole system is set up, the names given to clinics.
Yeah.
You know,
I think it's getting better because I think there's a lot of clinicians who have the impetus to go and change things, but
yeah,
the setup is not great.
Well, you're there, so that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. As my friend used to say, or as is said famously, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will break my heart.
Oh.
I think that's what law does, doesn't it?
Oh,
you didn't? All right, come to you.
Hi,
Hi.
thanks for that. I am a non-binary person who's recently had 2 babies. I've got a 5-year-old and an 18-month-old. And through a fertility clinic, so agree, like some of the things that I noticed in a fertility clinic, you go into a fertility clinic waiting room and like half the people in there look pretty queer, but nothing matches up to that at all in terms of like the process you're going through. You go in the toilets and it's like ladies do this, ladies do that. But the thing I wanted to note was like, as you were talking about those processes, your language didn't include me either.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that, I suppose it's in, yeah, I guess that's my point. That's my point, is that going through those processes feels extremely cis-normative.
Yeah.
The first time that I was pregnant, I decided not to come out to any clinicians as trans because there wasn't space for me and my partner to be cis women in that system.
Yeah.
So there certainly wasn't space for me to push those boundaries anymore in terms of gender.
No.
The second time I went through that process, 4 years later, I felt like I had to come out to them for myself, and it made absolutely no difference in terms of the way I was addressed.
Oh, right, okay.
But yeah, so I guess it would have been nice in your talk if I felt that I was acknowledged when you were talking about those processes, because it was still about women for most of the time that you were talking in that particular section.
Yeah, no, thank you. I was really conscious of, you mean integrating non-binary, the non-binary language? Non-binary identity?
Well, just like people into rather than women, I guess.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
I think
thank you.
sometimes, when we're talking about like kids and our relationships to kids, the words people and the words parents are often forgotten.
And so the difficult thing about a talk like this, in terms of explaining the law, is the law doesn't reflect that, does it?
Yeah,
So
that's what I want. I suppose it wasn't obvious to me whether you were quoting the law in those
Yeah.
sections or whether you were talking from your perspective.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
maybe just it was that clarity.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. So I'm interested in fostering or adopting in the future. And I was wondering, firstly, if trans men are permitted, I'm not interested in biological connection, if I would be allowed to be classed as the father despite not having a male birth certificate. A lot of other documents are classed as male, and that probably caused a lot of confusion with the government. And the second point is whether are studies about discrimination from like council adoption, because I've not looked into it much at all.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm
Yes,
kind of aware that even cis gay couples get discriminated against.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether I should disclose things like that.
Yeah,
Probably
so
not.
if you go onto the New Family Social website, you'll see information specifically directed at trans people, and you can definitely adopt. You might find what I've been told from people who have gone through the process is that they feel like they have to educate the people who should be explaining things to them. So, you know, and and your other question, about on the adoption certificates, I believe I'm correct in saying it wouldn't make any difference because you would just be registered as the parent. Yeah. 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 But there is a really strong campaign by New Family Social to try and encourage trans parents to adopt and foster. So I'd really encourage you to just go onto the website and get in touch with them. Yeah.
We have time for one final question because I'm hungry now. Ella, is there anybody online who wants to ask a question?
Yeah, I was going to be fair. I'll just start a lot.
No.
They said, Katie, adultery can't be committed in a same-sex female marriage. What provisions in law still need to be made for same-sex couples / trans / non-binary couples when things go wrong in marriages? I mean, I wasn't sure about this because obviously you don't need to give a reason for, you don't need to give like a reason anymore to get divorced. So I wasn't sure. I don't really understand the question.
I think it's actually about recognising
adultery.
Yes. As well, you could ask the question in relation to divorce law. I don't think the question's being asked in relation to divorce law. I think it's being asked in relation to basic legal rights and recognitions of those legal rights that are different with heterosexual marriages and gay marriage. You could ask for clarity on that, but
maybe you could expand on the adultery aspect of the rights.
I'm not sure I can.
Maybe I think one thing that strikes me in this question is to ask whether there should be any adultery laws at all for any.
Yeah, because of it not being a ground for divorce. Yes.
Also because adultery historically is related to the idea of woman being the property of the man.
Yeah.
So if we are questioning that at the very basis, as if we start to question that, or that is one of the foundations of queer theory, then how are we justified in making a demand for the extension of adultery laws to queer couples? Perhaps adultery laws should not exist for anyone.
At all. Well, I think the question is rooted in the inequality.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think.
Yeah.
Yes, I think so. Therefore, probably it just needs to fall for everyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Any last words? The conversations don't have to stop here. We have food and drinks just behind you, and we can keep talking to Katie and the others and asking them questions.
Also, just to add, if you would like to read some more things about the stuff we've spoken about today, there's a book display at the back. That's just a little tiny sample of the books that we've been collecting throughout the series. We also have like a whole list on the website and Instagram. Please follow our Instagram, just a little plug. Hey, one second.
Can I just give a plug to anyone in Sheffield? We do have a queer parents network that's quite new that people in the UK may not know about. And we're currently in the middle of an action which is trying to push back against the new trans guidance in school. So we're at Sheffield Queer Parents on Instagram. Sorry.
Thank you. That's great.
So, okay, sorry. Just a plug for Sheffield Queer Parents. For anyone, prospective parents also very welcome. We're on Instagram at Sheffield Queer Parents, and we're in the middle of an action which is trying to get a letter into all Sheffield schools which pushes back against the new trans schools guidance. So if anyone wants to get involved, then feel free to. It'd be lovely to have you.
Thank you.
That's lovely. All right, can we please give a round of applause to Katie, SJ, Scoop's not here anymore, and Kath. Thanks so much.